first breath breaking the stillness. In a softly lit room, a child opened her eyes to a world she could not yet see, yet that world was already watching her. She did not choose a throne. She did not ask for a crown. She was simply born, and in that instant, destiny took hold. Before she could speak, a nation was already waiting. Before she could walk, history had already written her name. This was not the beginning of a fairy tale. It was the beginning of a responsibility, an inheritance passed down not by choice, but by blood. A future decided long before she could understand the weight of it. Princess Leonore entered the world like any other child, fragile, unaware, wrapped in warmth. And yet, unlike any other child, her life would never belong entirely to herself. Every smile would be studied, every silence interpreted, every step measured against centuries of expectation. Innocence met inevitability that night. A cradle stood where a crown would one day rest. As she grew, the rules would come quietly: how to stand, how to speak, how to disappear behind duty. Pressure would not arrive all at once. It would seep in slowly, disguised as tradition, as preparation, as destiny. There would be scrutiny before she made mistakes, silence before she found her voice, strength demanded before it was ever tested. And from that moment on, from her very first breath beneath those palace walls, her life was never entirely her own. To understand the weight placed on Princess Leonore, you have to understand the moment Spain itself was standing in. This is not an ancient empire frozen in time. Spain is a modern democracy, proud, diverse, vocal, and deeply shaped by recent memory. The monarchy that survives here does not rule by power, but by permission. And that permission, you see, can be fragile. For years, public trust in the crown had been tested. Scandals, economic hardship, and political division left many Spaniards asking uncomfortable questions about relevance, accountability, and cost. The monarchy was no longer a distant symbol, it was a subject of debate. And debate, once it begins, rarely stays quiet. By the time Leonore was growing up, the institution she was born into was already walking a narrow path. Every public appearance mattered. Every word was weighed. Silence could be as dangerous as a mistake. This is why the next generation mattered more than ever. Spain did not just need a future monarch, it needed reassurance, continuity, a reason to believe the crown could still evolve, still belong to the people, rather than hover above them. And without realizing it, that burden slowly settled onto the shoulders of a child. Her parents, King Felipe VI and Queen Letizia, were not simply a mother and father in the public eye. They were symbols of restraint, responsibility, and reform. Their roles were carefully defined: stability over spectacle, duty over drama. Personalities were softened, emotions contained, because in this monarchy, image was survival. Leonore was shaped by that environment from the very beginning. She was not introduced to the public as a personality, but as a promise that things could be steadier, cleaner, more disciplined. Yet that promise came with risk, because hope can be just as heavy as criticism. Here is the quiet truth. She was asked to restore faith she didn't break. Long before she could understand politics, she was already positioned as an answer to it. Long before she had opinions, she was expected to represent balance, continuity, yes, but also renewal, tradition, but without the stains of the past. That is an impossible expectation for anyone, let alone a child. And so the monarchy narrowed its focus: less noise, less exposure, more preparation behind closed doors. Leonore's life unfolded carefully, deliberately, almost invisibly, because visibility, in this moment, carried danger. The crown did not want a star, it wanted steadiness. This was the world Leonore inherited. Not glittering, not secure, but cautiously hopeful. A monarchy holding its breath, a nation watching closely. And somewhere within all of that, a young girl learning how to grow up without ever stepping out of line. And from here, quietly, deliberately, we begin to step into her early childhood. From the outside, it looked gentle, carefully choreographed, almost ordinary. But inside the palace walls, childhood moved to a very different rhythm. Princess Leonore did not grow up surrounded by chaos or excess. She grew up surrounded by rules, not harsh ones, quiet ones, the kind that don't need to be spoken aloud because everyone already knows them. Where to stand, when to smile, how long to wave, when to remain still. Her early years were shaped less by play and more by observation. Adults spoke softly around her. Schedules were precise. Privacy was guarded. Even moments meant to feel spontaneous carried an invisible structure beneath them. This was not about control, it was about protection, because in a fragile monarchy, even childhood could become a headline. Her first public appearances were cautious, short, measured. A small figure stepping into carefully framed moments, always close to her parents, always under watchful eyes. The public responded with warmth, but also curiosity. Every photograph was studied, every expression interpreted. Was she confident enough? Too shy? Too serious? Before she could speak publicly, a story was already forming around her. Education became the next balancing act. The palace wanted something rare, normality without risk. Leonore attended school alongside other children, learning the same lessons, following the same routines, yet never quite free of the knowledge that she was different. Guards nearby, protocol never far away, a future always implied. She was encouraged to learn discipline early, but also humility, to listen before speaking, to observe before acting. These were not just personal values, they were institutional necessities. At her side was her younger sister, Infanta Sofia. Their relationship offered a rare glimpse of something unguarded. There was no rivalry, no competition, only contrast. Sofia appeared lighter, more spontaneous. Leonore, by comparison, seemed inward, reflective, cautious. Not because she lacked joy, but because she carried awareness. Awareness changes children. In public moments, Leonore's shyness was visible, a brief hesitation before stepping forward, hands clasped tightly, eyes searching for reassurance. These were not weaknesses. They were signs of a child who understood she was being seen, not as herself, but as what she represented. The media noticed everything. Too reserved, some said, too serious for her age. Others praised her composure, her calm, her maturity. Narratives hardened quickly, even when she was barely old enough to understand them. Future queen, symbol of stability. Labels attached themselves before personality ever had the chance. And so, Leonore learned restraint early. She learned that silence could be safer than honesty, that correctness mattered more than expression, that mistakes, so natural to childhood, were luxuries she could not afford publicly. Even joy had to be measured, even curiosity filtered. Growing up for her meant learning how not to disrupt. Yet, beneath that careful exterior, moments of humanity surfaced. A nervous smile before a speech, a glance toward her parents for reassurance, a quiet laugh shared with her sister when the cameras drifted away. These fragments mattered because they reminded the world that behind the title was still a child learning who she was allowed to be. This was a childhood lived gently, but never freely, watched without malice, guided without softness, designed to prepare, not to explore. She grew up carefully, quietly, correctly. And as the years passed, that careful upbringing would soon be tested, because a life shaped by observation eventually must step forward and speak. The moment everything changed did not arrive with ceremony, it arrived with shock. When King Juan Carlos I stepped aside, Spain didn't just witness an abdication, it felt a rupture. Trust had already been strained, patience already thin. The crown survived, but it emerged altered, exposed, and deeply aware of its own vulnerability. And in the quiet aftermath of that decision, the spotlight shifted, suddenly, decisively, toward a child. Princess Leonore became heir at an age when most children are still discovering who they are. Overnight, her future was no longer abstract. It was scheduled, timelined, prepared for. She was no longer simply growing up. She was ascending, whether she felt ready or not. Public expectations recalibrated instantly. This was no longer about potential, it was about assurance. Spain wanted to see stability in her posture, clarity in her voice, discipline in her silence. The questions were relentless, even when unspoken. Is she strong enough, composed enough, prepared enough? And so, the training intensified. Her days became more structured, language lessons deepened, constitutional principles entered her education. History was no longer a subject, it was a warning. Speeches were drafted and redrafted not to express personality, but to demonstrate balance. Tone mattered, pace mattered, even pauses mattered, because every word would be remembered. She was taught not just what to say, but what not to reveal, not just how to speak, but when silence was safer. Emotion was no longer spontaneous, it was moderated. Reactions were practiced, expressions refined. The institution needed reassurance, and reassurance could not come from uncertainty. Her first major public addresses marked a turning point. They were not long, they were not dramatic, but they were dissected with surgical precision. Commentators analyzed her posture, her breathing, her inflection. Did she hesitate? Did she smile too much? Too little? Was her voice steady or rehearsed? For a child, this level of scrutiny is suffocating. For an heir, it is unavoidable. The media followed closely. Every appearance became evidence. A tilt of the head became a headline. A pause between sentences became speculation. The narrative oscillated wildly. Praised one day, questioned the next. Too serious, too controlled, too young, too prepared. There was no winning, only surviving. This is where the real conflict emerges. Not in politics, not in ceremony, but inside her. Because Leonore was still a child, curious, cautious, quietly observant. Yet she was being shaped into something else entirely, a symbol, a projection, a solution to problems she did not create. Child versus symbol, person versus institution. Those tensions do not resolve easily. They press inward, they reshape identity. Leonore could not experiment with rebellion, nor retreat into anonymity. Every step forward had to align with expectation. Every instinct had to be filtered through responsibility. And responsibility does not ask if you are ready. Her father, King Felipe VI, understood this burden intimately. His own reign was defined by restraint and repair. He modeled discipline not through words, but by example. Calm over charisma, stability over spectacle. And Leonore watched, learning that survival here meant control. But control comes at a cost. There were moments, brief, unscripted, where the child beneath the role surfaced, a nervous breath before stepping to the podium, fingers tightening around a page, eyes flicking upward just once, as if searching for reassurance. These moments passed quickly, but they mattered. They reminded the world that beneath the title was still someone learning to carry it. Still, the expectation never eased. Because this monarchy could not afford another fracture. It could not afford missteps, ambiguity, or emotional miscalculation. The margin for error was gone, and that pressure, slowly and relentlessly, settled on Leonore's shoulders. She was no longer being prepared for the future. She was the future. Every lesson reinforced the same quiet truth. You do not belong to yourself first. You belong to the institution, to continuity, to the idea of Spain itself. Personal growth became secondary to symbolic stability. And so, she learned to internalize pressure rather than resist it, to move carefully rather than boldly, to speak when spoken to, and to listen far more than she spoke. This was not suppression, it was strategy. But strategy demands sacrifice. The more polished her public image became, the less visible her inner world remained. Identity narrowed, expression softened. The space between who she was and who she had to be grew thinner every year. And through it all, one unspoken rule governed everything. She cannot fail because the crown cannot afford it. This is the heart of her story. Not power, not privilege, but endurance. A young life shaped by expectations so immense it leaves no room for missteps. A future queen learning that strength here does not roar. It stands still, it waits, and it holds, no matter the weight.